I mentioned the other day that I'm getting my boat and tackle and everything else ready for spring fishing after not having fished much in a lot of years now, way too many. And I'm excited, I can't wait. But I got a lot of work to do. And I can't think of a more important place to start than with my reels. So let's take advantage of this bad weather we're having right now, being stuck indoors, and let's get some maintenance done on these old reels and see if we can't get these to where they're ready to put some fish in the boat. Properly functioning reels are an important part of catching fish. And they're also generally one of our biggest investments in fishing. So we want to make sure we do the maintenance on them to keep them going. And because I've done the maintenance on these reels over the years, here they are 25 years later on this one. Over 20 on pretty much all of these. They're still going strong. They're still as good as they can be. Now don't get me wrong, there are Model A Fords out there that are still going. That doesn't necessarily mean I want one as a daily driver. So just because these are old and still work, well, that's not really saying a lot. But these work just as well as anything out there today. And that's, again, it comes back to the maintenance. But also a part of this, once we start doing the maintenance on our reels, besides the obvious benefit of our reels lasting because they're maintained, once we really learn our reels inside and out, well, it's like any tool. When we really learn our tools, we can start modifying them so that we can make sure we get the best performance out of them possible for what we're using them for. I normally tear my reels completely down just like I'm doing with this little dowel right here. But I'm not going to go through that whole process of tearing them down and reassembly and all that stuff. There's already too many great videos out there. And the best one I've seen is by Tackle Junkie, where he goes really in depth on that, tearing it down, oiling, lubing, reassembly. And I'll leave a link in the description below to his videos on that. And I will throw out a couple of little tips there that he didn't mention for those of you that are new to tearing down a reel. It's pretty daunting. I mean, seriously. Take pictures as you're going, and it is extremely helpful if you have another reel that's identical to the one you're taking apart. That way, if you get confused on the order of washers and bearings and all that good stuff, you've got something else you can take apart to look at. Okay, that's how that went together. That's the order of, the washers or whatever. And be prepared to lose some stuff. The little C-clips, including the little C-clips that hold your bearings in place. These are tiny little things, and they love to fly across the room. So usually, when you buy a new reel, I have no idea what comes in a box now, but they used to include a couple of these, or at least one of these, in the little packet with the little wrench that came with your reel. And also, I had a little, here we go, little box of C-clips that you can pick up at an automotive store, various sizes. You might end up needing one of these before it's over. So he makes it look easy in his videos, and it is after you do a few, but it's pretty daunting when you start. Okay, so by us skipping all of that in-depth stuff, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the finer points of reel maintenance. Okay, and in my case, I like to know what I'm going to use a reel for, the technique and rod and so forth that I'm going to use a particular reel for before I start this. Okay, so these little dowels right here. I love these for finesse techniques. So light lures, small line, these are just perfect for that. Okay. Well, there's some things that are important for finesse fishing. First of all, good drag system, because you want a smooth drag when you have light line. And that's something I really want to pay particular attention to on this reel, is the drag washers. And sure enough, the drag washer's looking a little rough here, which it should be after 20 plus years on this reel. So this is something I'm going to want to change. And they have new drag washers now that are made out of carbon, which should be an upgrade for these reels. And the advantage of carbon is there's a lot of heat when our drag's being used, when a fish is pulling. And that's, these washers, or the whole drag system, is based on friction. So you tighten down these washers, when they'll slip, but it's the friction that keeps them from just continuously slipping. All right, well, that builds up heat when they're being used. And these washers can get burned up pretty quick after enough use. As a matter of fact, I've got some old drive gears here off some other reels that there's remnants of drag washers still on them. Well, carbon doesn't burn. So that's the big advantage of that. And a little side note, spinning reels, they're famous for having better drag systems than baitcasters. Well, that's because on your better spinning reels, I don't know about now, but used to, at least some of your drag washers were felt. And then that felt would hold just a little bit of oil, which would keep your drag washers from burning up. So, yeah, that's something we want to look into for these. And I'll go ahead and reassemble these as is for right now. But I'm going to get the dimensions off of this drag washer. And there's only one drag washer in here. Sometimes there's more. I'll get the dimensions off of this, write these numbers down, and then that way I can order some replacements. And then my drag's going to be just absolutely as slick as glass on these reels, and it's going to stay that way even with hard use. Something else I want to pay particular attention to with these reels is the bearings. And there have been improvements in bearings, or let me rephrase that, changes. I don't know if they're improvements yet, but there's new offerings now. There's ceramic bearings and air bearings and hybrid ceramic stainless bearings. Well, even back in the day, we still had ABEX 7 bearings. And for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, ABEC and then a number, that's just the industry standard in bearings for grading the bearings. So the higher the number, the tighter the tolerances the bearings were made to. And I've always been told that the stock bearings and reels are ABEC 5s. And then back in the day, it was really popular to go to the ABE 7s as an upgrade. They're tighter tolerance, smoother, so forth. Well, it looks good when you put your spool in here and you spin it and it just spins longer, but that doesn't necessarily equate to longer casts when you're fishing. How long it'll spin, free spooling doesn't have anything to do with how well it does casting fishing. And truthfully, I've never really seen much of a performance increase in upgrading the bearings. With that said, though, I have seen huge performance increases in changing out old, worn out bearings or bearings that are just burnt up, rough, whatever. Well, these bearings are about 20 years old. All right. They're still usable and serviceable, and I'll go ahead and check them. But I'm also probably going to experiment with some of the new ceramic bearings on these two reels in particular. And that's because the new ceramic are the air bearings. They're supposed to require less effort to pick up speed as far as spinning, which can be really useful for very light lures. So that's something I'll play with in the future, but for now, I am going to get the dimensions off my bearings, so the OD, the ID, and the thickness, or the outside diameter, inside diameter, and thickness. There's various companies that offer bearings that you can generally buy just a little set of bearings to change out your spool bearings, because that's the only ones that really matter here. So you change out your spool bearings and theoretically get a performance increase. But these reels being so old, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get a set of bearings for these. But if I've got my measurements, dimensions for the bearings, I can order individual bearings and it's not an issue. And again, after a certain point, it is a performance increase, just depending on how rough the bearings are. But for now, I'm just going to soak these in acetone, which is what I like to do with my bearings. And then I'll blow them dry with a compressor, let them dry after that further, and then put a drop of oil in them, put them back, and I'll check them before I put them back, make sure they spin freely. And when I get bearings in the future, it'll be a matter of just swapping these out. But we'll already have my dimensions while I'm in here. So I've got my reels pretty much completely torn down, and I've got everything soaking, and I've got citrus cleaner diluted for my brass and steel parts, and then I use Dawn dish detergent and warm water for my plastic and metal or aluminum. Okay, I don't want the citrus stuff on aluminum. And then acetone for the bearings. So I'm gonna let these soak, and then I'll pull everything out, scrub it, clean it, and then I'll let everything sit overnight and dry. All right. Now I've got 2 more reels here that I'm not going to tear these down right now just because I've got enough going on currently with this one. But this is some other things though that you can do to reels when I talked about, we need to know our tools. And the better we know our tools, the more we can do with them to make them do what we want. All right. In this case, these are old quantum energy reels. And I love these reels. Majority of my reels are these old quantum energies. They just work good. Or at least they have for me. Okay, well they came in different grades. This is a 400, and then there's a 500 that's black, and this is the 600. This was the high grade. Well, each one was also a different gear ratio. So the 400s were 5 point something to 1. The black ones were a slow gear ratio, which were 4 to 1, and then the silver ones, the 600s, are 6.1 to 1. Okay, well, I wanted to standardize my reels without going and buying a bunch of new reels. So way back in the day, I ordered new drag gears, or drive gears and pinions from Quantum, and I changed out all of my gears and my 6.1 to 1s so that they would be a 5 to 1 gear ratio, just like the lower grade reels here. And the reason I did that was I'm a big believer in consistency. Maybe I'm just OCD, I don't know. But I really try to visualize what my lures are doing in the water. And when you're retrieving, yeah, you can speed up and you can slow down, or you can use your normal retrieve. But when you can't see the lure, and then you've got different reels with different gear ratios, you got a lot of different variations there on how fast your lure's actually moving. And for me, it was very difficult to visualize that with all the different, speeds. So I decided just to make them all the same speed. We'll eliminate some variables. The problem is on the lures that you can see, generally you need to retrieve those pretty quick, like buzz baits. So I'm going to change some of these 600s back to 6.1 to 1s, put the old gears back in them while I'm in here, just because that will wear you out with the buzz bait all day with the 5 to 1 reel. And floating worm, all of the lures that you can see, generally you don't have to worry about your gear ratio. You can see what it's doing. But so yeah, I'll make a few changes here, but that's just an example of things you can do to modify your reels to get the performance you want out of them. That's just a little extra something there. And then in the case of the 400s here, these were the lowest grade quantum energies way back in the Stone Age. Well, these came with 4 bearings. So it was actually 3 bearings and a roller bearing. Well, one of the things you can do is you can pull out the old bushings in these and take order bearings, the same as it's in the 600, and then just replace the bushings. Primarily replace the bushing right here under this tension knob. And my other 400, I did replace the bushing with a bearing, and I haven't in this one, but I will. So that's something I'm going to pay attention on as far as this one. And it's a fairly inexpensive upgrade. I'm not going to go with any fancy bearings or anything like that for these reels. just the standard bearings will be perfect. So again, it's just something else you can do to your reels and upgrade your lower grade ones, or change the speeds on them to get what you want, and then combine that with things that you can do with your drag, and then with your bearings, as far as with the new bearings now, maybe doing better with lighter lures. We have options here, and that's the great thing about actually digging into these and tearing them down and knowing what you have with your reels. It helps you, or at least I think it does. And then there's just the doing the maintenance. These are going to be clean when I'm done. I used to do this once a year, and if I fish hard this year, I'll probably go back to once a year. It's time consuming. Let me go ahead and throw that out there now. It's a couple of hours on a reel, and I've got quite a few to do, so we're not going to finish them tonight. But then I'll just come out here in the evenings after work, and a few nights a week, and here in a couple of weeks they'll be done. And when I finish, these reels are going to be ready. This reel has completely been stripped, and now every single part on it's been scrubbed clean, and it's just drying. I blew everything off with the air nozzle with the compressor. But for like the bearings, I really want to let them dry overnight, and just from the moisture and the compressor. And then there's some hard to get to spots. I didn't take this cover off. There'll be a little moisture behind there, so I want to just let everything dry overnight. But generally, it's a good idea if you can put everything back together in the same day, so you don't forget where parts went, which is really easy to do. But that's where your pictures come in. And in my case, tomorrow when I put this back together, I've got an identical little dowel right here that I'll be taking this one apart as I'm putting this one together, so I can see, okay, this washer goes here. Which at this point for me, I've done this quite a few times, so I kind of know all the parts, and that makes it a lot easier. But for those of you that have never torn one down, it can be daunting. So take your time, take pictures, try to find a YouTube video on a reel exactly like yours before you start, and just in case there's something specific. But if you watch the video that I've got linked below, that's going to help out. And again, they're all pretty much the same. So I'm going to call it a night now. And I hope this helps some of you out, give you some ideas on things you can do with your reels. And again, for me, I just can't wait for some warmer weather. We got fish to catch this year. God bless, and y'all have a good night.